everybody. I just wanted to bring you all up to date on what we've been trying to do with respect to the tragic situation in Syria, and obviously mostly focused, or especially, Aleppo. I don't think I have to elaborate, but I'm going to certainly focus on the anger and the anguish that everybody feels, or most people feel, about the continued relentless and inexcusable attacks that have been directed at the civilian population in Aleppo, including women, children, humanitarian workers, and medical personnel. And there is absolutely no justification whatsoever for the indiscriminate and savage brutality against civilians shown by the regime and by its Russian and Iranian allies over the past few weeks, or indeed for the past 5 years. Now, the position of the United States remains clear, and I have personally reiterated that position in conversations over the past weeks, and especially over the past 24 hours, with the UN Special Envoy, Staffan de Mistura, who I talked with earlier today, who's in Paris, meeting now with Jean-Marc Ayrault, and with senior officials from Russia, Qatar, Turkey, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and other countries in the region. What the United States is working towards, and has been working towards for some period of time now, under difficult circumstances, where if some parties do not want to move in that direction, it remains very difficult to secure, obviously, a ceasefire. But what we want in Aleppo right now, which is the precursor to any ability to move to other things, is an immediate and verifiable, durable cessation of hostilities, and that includes all attacks by the regime, its allies, and other combatants in Aleppo. All combatants in Aleppo. And we've been working very hard on that. We worked on that in Hamburg in my meetings with Foreign Minister Lavrov, where we reached some measure of agreement, in fact, considerable measure of agreement, but weren't able to secure every component of what was needed in order to move forward. We want safe passage, corridors of evacuation, which we're beginning today to see perhaps take shape, but we want to see those for both civilians and fighters who choose to evacuate the city. We want full access for the delivery of humanitarian supplies to people in need throughout Syria, and with these steps, we are convinced that the killing and the suffering in Syria could stop, and it could stop very, very quickly if Russia and the regime made the decision to do so. This morning, I was encouraged by reports that after a number of fits and starts, what we worked on in Paris and then got picked up on in continued conversations, which, by the way, we were informed of by Russia and Turkey, were going to take place to build out on what we talked about, actually using the same template that we had created. There are individual ceasefires being worked out, individual arrangements with armed opposition group commanders, and it appears, for some period of time at least, we don't know yet if it will hold or where it is, that airstrikes and shelling have stopped, and that the ceasefire may, I emphasize may be, taking hold. Buses, some of them, and convoys are beginning to move, and my understanding is that the first group of 21 buses and 19 ambulances reached its checkpoint at Khan al-Assal. Now, this convoy includes more than 1,000 people who are on their way to the Turkish border. However, and this is a big however, we have also heard reports that a convoy of injured people was fired on by forces from the regime or its allies. And we remain deeply concerned as well that we are hearing reports of Syrian men between the ages of 18 and 40 who have apparently been detained or conscripted into military service when trying to pass through government checkpoints, and that some of these actually went missing days or even weeks ago, and we still don't have, families don't have, their loved ones don't have accountability for what has happened to them. Obviously, these actions are despicable, and they're contrary to the laws of war and to basic human decency. Now, more positively, we have finally received pledges from Russia that it will assist in the monitoring of evacuations, that the International Red Cross and the Syrian Arab Crescent, Red Arab Crescent, will also be allowed access in order to be able to try to help with the monitoring. The UN is prepared to receive evacuees in numerous sites, and emergency relief kits have been pre-positioned to try to help people. Medical assistance is also going to be available. The government of Turkey is prepared to accept more evacuees for aid and treatment. So it appears that the necessary preparations have been made for the evacuation process that will eventually save lives, but the implementation of that process continues to be dependent on the actions of the regime and its allies on the ground. Let me emphasize, we're going to continue to do our part. The United States of America is going to continue to try to push the parties towards a resolution. As President Obama said the other day, in giving us all both his impressions as well as instructions about these next days, we're going to be trying every way we can to try to save lives and push this to where it needs to get to. To date, we've provided more than $6 billion in food, water, medicine, and other supplies to people who have been affected by the violence in the region. And let me be clear. I said it once, I'm going to say it again. What has happened already in Aleppo is unconscionable. But there remains tens of thousands of lives that are now concentrated into a very small area of Aleppo. And the last thing anybody wants to see, and the world will be watching, is that that small area turns into another Srebrenica. It is imperative that key actors step up and do their part. And I call on the entire international community to join in exerting pressure on all parties to go forward with the process that has been laid out for some period of time now, to abide by the cessation of hostilities, and to bring the killing and the cruelty, particularly starting with Aleppo, which lays the groundwork to be able to take the next steps, particularly in Aleppo. Now, all of you know that we've been engaged in a lot of talks over the period of an extended period of time now. And all of those talks have been geared towards trying to end the war in Syria, the civil war in Syria. In September, after months of very tough negotiation, Foreign Minister Lavrov and I were able to stand up late at night and make an announcement in Geneva that we had arrived at an agreement, September 9th. And that agreement required a number of days, as everybody knows, of calm in order to indicate the seriousness of purpose, and then we were going to have joint cooperation in order to move forward. Regrettably, for a number of different reasons, Syrian troops that were accidentally bombed, and a humanitarian convoy that was not accidentally but purposefully destroyed by Assad regime to start with, and then by others who joined in, it fell apart. And everybody feels the pain of a lost moment, of a lost opportunity for externalities that we did not have, apparently, control over. More than a year ago, we agreed on a series of steps that could have and should have produced a lasting ceasefire and direct negotiations. The process has not succeeded, mostly, in my judgment, because of the continued, constant unwillingness of the Assad regime to live by those agreements, to always press it, to always break out, to always try to gain more territory, and to go out publicly, not reaffirming its willingness to go to Geneva and negotiate, but always affirming publicly in one brash statement after another its readiness to take back the whole country, to crush the opposition, and to do everything without regard to the real underlying concerns of many people who want to be part of a legitimate government, part of a legitimate process, but fear that Assad is not going to be their leader and that he will never be able to unite the country. That's what's fueled this and kept it going. So we have arrived now at another critical point, another critical juncture. If Aleppo falls completely and people are slaughtered in that small area, it will be even harder to be able to bring people around. And it will not end the war. The fall of Aleppo, should it happen, does not end the war. It will continue. There still is the challenge of governing and the challenge of reuniting the country and the challenge of rebuilding the country. And how many countries will step up and rebuild it for the policies that are being executed today? So provided we are able to stabilize the situation in Aleppo, it is essential that we move forward at the earliest possible moment with a Syrian-led political process aimed at ending the war and transitioning to a new and more representative government. And without that meaningful transition of power in which the voices of the Syrian people are heard, the opposition will continue to fight. Terrorists will continue to be drawn to the country, and millions of Syrians will continue to be forced to flee their homes. So here I want to emphasize that every single party I've spoken to in recent days, in Paris last week, and from here in Washington this week, as recently as this morning, every stakeholder tells me they are ready and willing to get back on the path to Geneva, and that includes the legitimate Syrian opposition. It includes Turkey and Qatar and the Arab states. The only remaining question is whether the Syrian regime, with Russia's support, is willing to go to Geneva, prepared to negotiate constructively, and whether or not they're willing to stop this slaughter of their own people. So let's be crystal clear about who bears responsibility for what we have seen and what we are seeing and continue to see in Syria. We are seeing the unleashing of a sectarian passion, allowing the Assad regime, not allowing, the Assad regime is allowing, and the Assad regime is aiding and abetting, and the Assad regime is actually carrying out nothing short of a massacre. And we have witnessed indiscriminate slaughter, not accidents of war, not collateral damage, but frankly purposeful, a cynical policy of terrorizing civilians. So we believe this is a moment where the Syrian regime and the Russian military have an opportunity to make the decision to a strategic decision, I might add, for peace. One that will make it possible for a cessation of hostilities all across Syria, which could flow right out of this. Every minister I've talked to said, we're for a ceasefire countrywide. But you have to be able to deal with Aleppo to legitimize getting to a countrywide effort. In addition to that, everyone has reconfirmed to me their readiness to go to Geneva for discussions aimed at putting an end to this horrific war. So that's the only way that anybody I've talked to with any common sense and with any strategic vision says you can end this war. It will take negotiations. And they haven't taken place in all of these years, any real negotiations. But all of the parties have now told me, with the exception of what we haven't heard from Assad himself and his willingness to go out and actually negotiate in good faith and try to bring Syria back together. That is the only way to make progress towards a united and peaceful Syria that is reflected in Resolution 2254, as well as in the ISSG statements, which include Russia and Iran. So hopefully people will put actions where the words have been.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Secretary, do you have any response to reports that Putin himself was directly involved in election-related attacks? Do you think the administration should have come out before the election more boldly with hard intelligence about these attacks?
Well, look, I am not going to start making comments at this point. I haven't commented on this publicly because of the job I do. But let me say today that I'm not going to comment on anonymous reports from intelligence officials that are not identified, that have quotes around the concept of intelligence officials. I just am not going to comment on that. But let me comment very specifically on your sort of question about earlier. Folks, we sat in the Situation Room, I remember, in the White House with the President of the United States, and the President made the decision based on the input that was carefully vetted by the intelligence community and presented to everybody, that he did have an obligation to go out to the country and give a warning. And he did so. Back in October, the President authorized the Director of National Intelligence to, and the Department of Homeland Security together, to make a very clear statement to this nation, to our nation. And they said unequivocally that they assessed with high confidence, that's what we said in October, with high confidence that the Russian government directed compromises of emails from U.S. institutions, including political organizations, and that these thefts and disclosures were intended to interfere with our election process. So the President understood and made clear it's a serious matter. It was a serious matter then. It's a serious matter now as even more information comes out. I'm not going to comment on it further, except to say that people need to remember that the President issued a warning, but he had to be obviously sensitive to not being viewed as interfering on behalf of a candidate or against a candidate, or in a way that promoted unrealistic assessments about what was happening. I think the President did that, and now we have to get at the facts, and I'm confident we will in the months ahead. Thank you all very much.
Secretary.
Okay, that was my opening statement. I don't think I have anything to top on that, so we'll get right at it. Can you follow on Aleppo?
Yeah, he said that we want the united Syria. You want to go back to the Geneva. I assume that's Geneva 1 point.
What he's talking about in Geneva is he's talking about, because that's where the first and second
talk.
round of talks had occurred.
But there's a Geneva understanding that was back in 2012, which stipulated certain points and to get the process going. So I assume that he's talking about that.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to ask you specifically is that if let's say when you talk about a political process and a united Syria, if the regime chooses, or Bashar al-Assad chooses to be a part of this process and run an fair and transparent elections and so on, would he be allowed to? Because you guys have committed yourselves in the past to the fact that he lost his legitimacy to govern.
Yeah, well, I think we still believe that, Saeed. And as we've said before, those are exactly the sorts of issues that need to be hammered out in political talks, is what this transition looks like and what an election looks like. And that's why it's so important to get the regime and the opposition together to talk.
So I understand, but
We're not going into this proscriptively, Saeed, and laying out what it all has to look like before they've even had a chance to talk.
because it is obvious that the regime, not necessarily Bashar al-Assad, but the regime itself represents a good portion of the Syrian people. I mean, there are minorities that look to them for leadership. There's a large portion of the Sunni population, many others, Christians and so on. So they would want that kind of political entity to represent them. Will they be allowed? Should they be allowed as part of any political process that is fair and transparent?
Should who be allowed?
The regime, the Ba'athist regime of Syria.
There's no question that in political talks, should we get to that point, that the regime would be represented in that. I mean, you can't have a political talks and to lead to a solution without the regime being represented, as they were in the first two rounds. And you talked about a large part of the Syrian population that may be supportive of the regime. Let's also talk about the much larger portion of the Syrian population that has been killed, injured, maimed, forced to flee their homes and businesses, in fact, forced to flee the country. Some 4.8, maybe more million people have been sent into refuge outside Syria. Now, one of the things that we have said throughout our discussions about what the transition process should look like and how elections ought to be held is that we believe it's very, very important that the diaspora, those that have been flung outside the country because of the brutality of their own government, ought to have a chance to cast their ballot, to have a say, to let their voice be heard. So, again, we're not going into this proscriptively by detail. That's the whole reason you want to have talks. Okay, Carol?
John, I can't help but feel like we've been here before. Do you have any reason to believe that as long as the words of the Secretary and the rest of the world fall on deaf ears in Damascus, that there is anything in the dynamics on the ground that will make this any different than what we've heard in weeks ago and months ago?
Well, certainly, I think we're all mindful, and I think you could hear it in the Secretary today, we're all mindful that that we have said these things before. We have made these same arguments. We have urged the same sort of restraint and dignified approach on both the regime and its backers to little avail. We're exceedingly frustrated by where we are. Nobody wants to see what we see coming out of Aleppo specifically. But as to your exact question on, can I predict a change? No, and I wouldn't even attempt to. But this much is clear, Carol. If things don't change, if we can't get back to discussions in Geneva about a political transition, a peaceful transition to some sort of democratic government in Syria, then the war goes on. And sadly, regrettably, we might be up here talking about another community, another city that's facing slaughter. That means more extremists are going to be drawn to Syria. It means more refugees, more internally displaced people as well as refugees out the country, which will continue to strain the resources of countries like nations like Turkey and Jordan and in Europe. And it means that the opposition will continue to fight. The civil war will not end. And it's hard to imagine how that can be seen, that outcome, those outcomes, I should say, can be seen as in the interests of anyone, including Bashar al-Assad.
But is there anything happening on the ground? Is there any reason to believe that this time might be different? Is this, say nothing or forever hold your peace?
It's not going to be forever hold your peace if we don't get to better outcomes. I think Secretary Kerry well enough that for every second that he's in the chair, he's going to be continuing to try to get a political transition in Syria on the way. There's absolutely no question about that. But I mean, I think we just have to take this, one day at a time. Now, as talking about this day, as he said to you, there has been some positive movement, and it would be remiss of us not to recognize the fact that there are buses that have moved into Aleppo to move people out. And indications are that the first to move out were those who were injured, hurt, sick, and not necessarily mobile. And they were monitored and escorted by Red Crescent personnel. So that's not, that's worth recognizing, that today we did see some people get out safely and securely. We need to see that continue. More critically, what we need to see is a cessation of the violence in Aleppo, because as soon as this ceasefire was announced, just 48 hours ago, it was almost as immediately broken. So we've seen some positive steps today, and we'll just have to stay at it.
John,
Abigail?
following up on what you said, that there will be more cities where this happens, are there any plans underway for preventing this from happening in Idlib or wherever it is that the people who are being removed from East Aleppo are heading.
Well, if you mean that we're engaging our partners and relevant parties to this conflict to try to forestall that kind of thing, yes, of course we are. I can't predict. I'm just saying that that's the logical outcome because Aleppo is not going to be end. Even the dictator Assad said that taking back Aleppo wasn't going to end the war. Except when he says it, it has a much more dark connotation there. I don't know, but what we do know is that unless we can get back to the table and try to get some sort of political transition in process, to try to offer a way through to end the war diplomatically, it will continue. And since we believe that, you have to assume that it will continue on the streets of other cities, other towns, other communities. I just don't know where or when that might be. Yeah.
The Secretary mentioned that everybody is on board for negotiations except the regime, the regime, and you also now are saying the same thing. But who has approached the regime? Have we talked to Russians? Has this regime rejected an offer to be on board, or is it still up in the air? Have they been approached formally through Russia? Because
of course they've been approached through Russia. We don't have direct communications with the
Yeah,
Assad
that's
regime,
it,
but
yeah.
Russia does. They have the most influence on them, and yes, we have pressed upon them to press upon the Syrians to come back to the table and to try to have some kind of meaningful political transition. And as the Secretary said, they have thus far not only proven unwilling to do that, but proven all the more brutally willing to kill their own people.
John, do you have any direct communication with the groups left in the small part of Aleppo?
I don't know what the status of direct communications are with the opposition fighters in Aleppo. I don't think I have that clear a picture. We obviously have contacts with and communication with some opposition groups. There are other nations in the region that are in closer communication with yet other groups. I don't know exactly how many or who the opposition are left in Aleppo, so it'd be difficult for me to answer that question.
So to clarify the position of U.S., the Secretary Kerry said that if Aleppo falls, so do you believe that there is still an opportunity for the opposition groups to hold this small part?
It would be. The Secretary's right. I mean, I think we don't believe the entire city has fallen yet, but it is certainly on the brink of doing that. I mean, we're realistic, we're pragmatic about that. And that's why, because we are where we are, that's why we've been working to get civilians as well as opposition members out of there safely and securely. I can't predict when that small enclave may or may not be taken, or what that's going to look like, or how hard it's going to be fought for. But by just about any measure, Aleppo has, almost completely been taken back.
As far as I understand, the evacuation means the fall of Aleppo.
The what?
The evacuation of these fighters and the civilians in the small parts means...
I think we're all facing the reality that that's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not sure I understand what the point is. I mean, I think we all recognize, nobody's looking at what's going on in Aleppo with rose-colored glasses here. I mean, the city is almost totally now been taken by the regime. I mean, we recognize that, and and the Assad regime was able to do that with the help of external actors, including Russia and Iran, and there's no disputing that either. And sadly, hundreds of thousands of people have suffered, many of them innocent people, men, women, and children. And that's why, because of where we are with Aleppo, because the situation is so dire, first of all, that's one of the reasons why the Secretary came out to talk to you directly, because of the situation that we're in right now, and because of the need to try to save whatever lives are left in Aleppo that can be saved, and to allow the opposition to get out safely with their light weapons.
The status of this enclave, is there fighting going on now, or are they being evacuated? Are they part of the cessation of hostilities or the ceasefire?
First of all, I don't
because
know.
I saw on some footage of these trucks convoys going through areas that is under Syrian government control and moving north towards the countryside and to Idlib.
I don't know the status of fighting in this
Right.
small area, but we have reason to believe that there could be opposition as well as innocent civilians there. And we'd like to get, we'd like to see that we can get those people out safely and securely. What the regime will do, I couldn't possibly predict.
Because the implicit message when you say, if Aleppo falls, the implicit message is that it may not, which means that these fighters will hang on, or they will stay where they are, which is, I guess, in contradiction with the terms of the ceasefire as we understand it, right?
Again, Saeed, I don't have perfect visibility into what's going on in this small area. I mean, Aleppo, for all intents and purposes, has been taken back by the regime. We recognize that. And our focus right now is more on trying to save the lives that yet can be saved, and trying to get people out that can and will get out safely and securely to other locations, to aid and assistance, food, water, and medicine that is waiting for them. Nick?
I just want to follow up on something the Secretary said. He said, hopefully people will put actions where the words have been. We've heard a lot of words from him, a lot of indignation. Is the United States prepared to take action aside from calling for political talks to halt the violence in Aleppo?
What sort of action are you referring to?
Be any action, that's what I'm asking you. Is the U.S. prepared to take action beside, the Secretary said himself, hopefully people will put actions where the words have been. What actions?
He's referring to the actions and the responsibilities that are incumbent upon the regime, Russia and Iran specifically. Those are the three parties here who have in the past said that they favor a peaceful solution, that they favor diplomacy, and have proven quite the contrary. Those are the individuals. That's where hang on a second, that's where the responsibility lies. That's where the failure of leadership is. Now, to your question, short answer is yes, the United States will continue to act, to do whatever we can to try to get a cessation of hostilities in Syria and get a return to political talks. And we're going to do that through hopefully the support of the international community and continued diplomatic efforts. Now, we've talked a lot, because I get the implication in your question, I understand very perfectly. The discussion of military options. And while discussions about options and alternatives always remains a live issue inside our government, those sorts of options have been carefully considered. They have been discussed thoroughly. And even at the at the advice and counsel of our nation's top military leaders, it has been, the decision has been made that those are not options that will get us to the end we seek, either in terms of risk and resources and cost, but also to potential unintended outcomes and consequences in Syria that could actually be worse for the Syrian people. So it's not like those things haven't been thought about, and it's not like they don't continue to be thought about. But as the President said, there are no options that are better than a diplomatic one, and one that involves getting the opposition and the regime to the table to try to talk about a political transition. So I just want to be clear, and I'm not, Nick, I'm not picking on you, but when you say act, we are acting. We have been acting. We have been leading. And the word act doesn't necessarily have to mean anything other than diplomacy, although it can. So we very much have taken a leadership role. It was Secretary Kerry who led the formation of the International Syria Support Group. It was the United States who led efforts inside the UN to get that Resolution 2254 into place. It was the United States which tried to work this out bilaterally with Russia, and then when that failed because Russia wouldn't meet its commitments, it was the United States who fashioned together a smaller multilateral effort that we were talking about in recent weeks. So we're very much going to stay committed on this.
So just a quick follow-up
Sure.
on that. I mean, he compared it, from the podium, he compared Aleppo to Srebrenica. You have a member of, Samantha Power literally wrote the book on the responsibility to protect. Does the U.S. believe it has a responsibility to protect people in Aleppo?
We absolutely believe we have a responsibility to try to protect the innocent from slaughter. Absolutely we do. And we have been acting on that responsibility for now, more than 5 years, but more specifically for the last 18 months to 2 years to try to get a peaceful solution to the conflict. Coming from my background, and then coming here, diplomacy is action. Diplomacy is leadership. Diplomacy is a choice. And it is often a more painstaking choice. It is often a slower choice. And as I've witnessed myself being in these discussions, it can be in many ways a much more challenging choice to make, but it is a choice and it is action. And it does connote leadership. And the United States has been leading in this, very much leading in this effort. Now, Nick, to be honest and fair, and I think you could hear it in Secretary Kerry's voice, nobody's happy that thus far diplomacy hasn't gotten us where we want it to go. We recognize that this diplomatic approach has fallen short of the outcomes that we wanted to achieve, that we seek. But that doesn't mean that it shouldn't still be pursued. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't still lead and act and discuss and debate and try to get better outcomes, better decisions, better changes in the calculus of some of the parties in terms of the way forward. Because as I said, I think it was to Carol, it's difficult to see that the alternative, which is the inability to make the right decisions by Russia, Iran, and the regime, is in their actual long-term security interests. Because what happens is the war just continues, and the bloodshed continues to happen, and extremists continue to be drawn in. Just this past week, Palmyra was retaken by the Islamic State, a city that had, to great ballyhoo, had been liberated back by the regime with Russia's help, and they lost it. And I think that says something about their quote-unquote stated commitment to defeat terrorists on their own soil. So again, we believe that through our diplomatic leadership, we are acting on behalf of the Syrian people, and that we do shoulder and take that responsibility very seriously. But the other thing that I can, and I know I'm rambling here, but I want to get to the core of your question. The other thing that Ambassador Power said clearly was it's up to the international community as well to continue to shoulder and bear that responsibility. It doesn't. I'm not at all shrugging off U.S. leadership or our role. We very much are aware of our responsibility here too to continue to lead these efforts. But so too, as the Secretary said, do we need the international community on board as well. Carol.
John, when the Secretary spoke with Foreign Minister Zarif regarding the Iran Sanctions Act, surely they must have talked about Aleppo. Can you tell us what was said and if there was any attempt to somehow leverage them to
I'm really
pressure?
not. I'm not at liberty to read out specific discussions with Foreign Minister Zarif right now. Obviously, the Iran Sanctions Act and the extension was the core topic.
Is there a proper analogy to make between Aleppo and Srebrenica? Is it? I mean, how do you make that analogy? What is the yardstick?
I think, I think it's an obvious analogy to make given the level of slaughter that we've seen and the brutal, indiscriminate manner in which innocent people have been, in some cases, executed right in the streets. No historical analogy is perfect, but I think I can definitely see, and I was alive and remember those events as well. There are parallels in terms of the brutality of one group to another. and with along and with sectarian lines and sectarian influences. Yes, ma'am.
This regards the situation in Iraqi Kurdistan. Senior Kurdish officials, including the KRG Prime Minister today, have complained about the continued PKK presence in Sinjar. They say that the PKK is blocking the Yazidis from returning to their homes and rebuilding their communities. What's your view of that situation?
Well, I haven't seen those remarks, so it'd be difficult to provide a specific comment on it. What I can tell you is, and I think we continue to believe that the PKK, which is a U.S. designated foreign terrorist organization, should have no role in Sinjar. And we regard their presence there as a major obstacle to reconciliation and to the return of internally displaced people. We urge all groups, including the KRG, to facilitate political reconciliation so that these internally displaced people can return and the traumatized communities in that region can rebuild. We also urge continued close cooperation between the central government in Baghdad and the Kurdistan regional government to defeat Daesh and to resolve any other outstanding issues between them.
So if I have represented his comments correctly, then you're essentially in agreement with them?
I think I'm going to let my statement stand the way it was. I haven't seen those comments. I was simply stating to you what our policy is with respect to the PKK in Sinjar. Steve?
Earlier today, there was a report released by the International Crisis Group indicating that Rohingya from Saudi Arabia are directing an insurgency in Rakhine State in Burma, Myanmar. We got a statement earlier today from this building referring us to that report, not taking any contention with the conclusions. The Burmese intelligence service is also telling the VOA Burmese service that this concurs with their intelligence. I wonder if you could elaborate on the reaction to this, and also if this is happening, being directed out of Saudi Arabia, do the Saudis bear some responsibility in looking into this?
What I can tell you is we're aware of their report, and we're actually reviewing it right now. So it would be inappropriate and premature for us to make any judgments or statements about individual findings. In general, obviously, we work routinely every day with allies and partners and friends all over the world to counter violent extremism. And the threat of violent extremism, wherever it is, and it's in many places, is something all of us, all governments, can and should pay attention to trying to combat. But again, I'm not in a position right now to make any comment on specific findings in the report. Yeah.
John, as a follow-up to Sinjar question, there is a group, you mentioned about the PKK presence there. There is a group which is using the name of Sinjar Protection Units in Sinjar. I mean, they are affiliated with PKK, but there is also, another group like PYD. So you see, for example, PYD and PKK, two separate groups. But in Sinjar, you see, is it same organization? You call them PKK instead of Sinjar
What I said
Protection
was
Units?
we continue to hold the PKK as a terrorist organization, and they shouldn't have any role in Sinjar, and that's our point. And our assessment of the PKK hasn't changed, and I have no updates to give you in terms of our view of the PYD as a.
The thing is, they are using the name of Sinjar Protection Units instead of PKK. They have own flags, they have own, the organizational chart, etc., differently from PKK.
What's your question?
So you see them as PKK instead of
As I said,
Sinjar Protection Units.
PKK is a terrorist organization. We don't believe they should have any role in Sinjar. I'm not going to get into intelligence assessments or analysis about how they may be organizing themselves or branding themselves.
Just trying to understand the two different approach for Syria and Iraq.
I know. I think I've answered the question. Take a couple more. Let me go in the back here, and then I'll come to you. You'll get the last question, okay? Go ahead.
I was going to ask about Japan. The Abe Putin meeting in Yamaguchi, they agreed to start 2+2 talks with their foreign and defense ministers, and they agreed to talk about some economic cooperation between the Kuril/Northern Islands. Do you have any reaction to the meetings? Are you worried that this can erode the G7 sort of front against Russia?
Well, as I said yesterday, sovereign nation states determine their sovereign foreign policy agenda and their schedules and their visits, and we're not in a position to pass judgment on this meeting or the contents of it. I think it's for the leaders of those nations to characterize what they discussed and the tone, tenor, and whatever decisions or joint priorities may have come out of that. We believe it's important for nations, certainly Pacific nations, and both of them are, to have meaningful dialogue and discussion and improved bilateral relations. All that is to the betterment of the safety and security and stability of the region. But I'll leave it to those foreign leaders to characterize their discussions. Saeed?
I have a very quick question on the Palestinian issue. A couple of days ago, I asked you about 2 hospitals that were on the verge of closing down because the PA is not paying up its obligation to these hospitals to the tune of about $15 million. I wonder if you have any comment or any information on that.
We are concerned about the situation with the Al-Mutala and Al-Maqasid hospitals. In fiscal year 2015, the United States contributed $35 million towards East Jerusalem hospitals, and we plan to continue providing support, subject, of course, to available funding. And I just don't have an exact amount at this time.
Do you believe that the PA is sort of shirking its responsibilities towards these hospitals?
Well, I think I'm going to leave my statement as it is. Thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon.